Okay, we're continuing in our laws of Shabbat, and particularly the laws of using electricity on Shabbat, which has many, many implications for us. Again, this is one of the hottest and most important topics that we deal with. And of course, it has to be one of the most confusing as well. So we're going to continue on. And as I've been doing this, I've been like, it just open every day, even the questions that people ask here, open thoughts in my mind. We're using a book that's not old. It's only, I think we said, written in the last 20 to 30 years. So it's pretty recent, but there are a number of advances that have happened since then, and how we apply all the different rules and so on. And are we using necessarily this book as the be-all, end-all, especially since there's a lot of flux, is a good question in of itself. So we've started already, and we've gotten some basic ideas. What I'd like to do is, just as a kind of a go forward, is I want to make sure that we go through what he has to say. And then at the end, once I finish what he has to say, I'm going to kind of just do a whole recap and then, where we come down on certain different things. So I may, at certain points in time, say, I'm going to save that question for the end, so you may hear me say that occasionally, and hopefully some point next week, because I'm just looking at the way the book schedules out, some point next week we can have a, this is it, electricity class, so let me, but we're going to get to that. We're not up to that. Okay. So of course, if I didn't say it, which I don't think I did, today's classes are sponsored, Le'ilui Nishmat, Rina Bat Rose by Stevie Shalom, and also in memory of Simcha Bat Sophia by Ezra Hedaya. So we're all the learning that we do is Le'ilui Nishmatan. Okay, so he says as follows. We're now talking about radio and television. אסור לערוך רדיו וטלוויזיה מערב שבת על ידי שעון אוטומטי כדי ליהנות מהם בליל שבת, כיוון שהתוכניות נעשות על ידי יהודים בחלל שבת, ואפילו שיתלה מודעה על פתח ביתו שהרדיו ערוך בערב שבת על ידי שעון, יש עוד כמה טעמים לאסור. ושומר נפשו ירחק מהטלוויזיה לגמרי ולא יביא תועבה אל ביתו. So the rabbi here is writing in Israel, so some of the things that he states do not apply to us. He says, you're not allowed to set the television or the radio up from before Shabbat, either stay on Shabbat or some kind of timer that it goes on and off and things like that. He says, so the reason that he gives is interesting. He says, because all the people on the television are Jews that don't keep Shabbat, and you're therefore supporting the hands of those who don't keep Shabbat. So that doesn't apply to us, right? Because even though there's a lot of Jews in Hollywood today, most of what is on television is not Jewish people. And even if you were to say that, most of what's on TV is not live, right? So really that issue is not really the major issue, but he says there's lots of other reasons to forbid it. And then he goes to make a very strong statement, and he says, and television is a bad thing altogether. You shouldn't have one in your house to begin with, right? Which, okay, there's certainly a lot of people that take that approach, but most of us do not. We feel that being connected to the what we call the outside world, in moderation and with filters and so on, is a good thing. But so we wouldn't completely rule out having a television. So he hasn't really made a clear case for us as to why we should not watch television or leave the radio on from before Shabbat. It would be easier to explain why I can't turn it on, right? And it would be easier why I could explain why I can't change channels, but he doesn't even go into that. So I'm just going to say, he says television, radio, no. The reasons that he gives don't really apply to us, which means that this is an area that we have to come back to. And as I said, we will come back to kind of at the end when we do our concluding lesson. But just to point out that what he says here is television, radio, no go. Ezra, you had a question or no? No. Okay, great. So now he talks about something that most of us don't use anymore, but it's going to be helpful anyway. And that is a tape recorder, right? You all remember tape recorders, I imagine, right? The way that it worked was there was a cassette and it had a tape in it, and you could, the machine would kind of record sounds or video, because the VHS, VCR, would record on a magnetic tape, and then that could be played back by a machine, and it could either produce sound or sound and image, right? Everyone remembers VHS, right? Yeah, Betamax, right? Things like that. So he's talking about those kinds of tapes. So listen to what he has to say here. He says, Asur lechaven tape me'erev Shabbat l'haf'ilo al yedei sha'on chashmali. He says you can't set up a tape on Erev Shabbat to work by a timer on Shabbat in order to do what? To record music or tapes or chazanim or things like that. So it's interesting. He doesn't make it clear what he means by this, right? Like, I can't set up a tape. So 1 second, that means I can't have a tape recording me talking or what's happening in shul, or does he mean I can't record a tape of not me talking, something else happening, a non-Jew, somewhere else. Or, as you may recall about television, one of the great interesting things that the VCR used to be able to do and confused a lot of people was the VCR could record what was on TV without the TV being on. I don't know if you remember that. It's not unusual because today TiVo and other things could do the same thing. But it was interesting that it was connected to the TV, and it wasn't, and it was recording the TV, but the TV didn't have to be on in order to do that. Is that also forbidden? He doesn't make it clear here. He doesn't say. So again, I leave that question for the end. So as I said, I'm going to keep saying that there's going to be things that he just doesn't get to here. And he says also you can't have a tape playing from before Shabbat, right? So he says, so let's say I would have, I'm going to go to like totally religious things, right? Like, let's say Yaakov Salem recorded a beautiful thing that's going to be, beautiful Pizmonim Shabbat music, right? And I want to play it at my Shabbat table, right? Because who wants to hear me sing, right? Like, when you hear me sing, it's not such a good voice, right? But Yaakov Salem, Yechiel Nahari, Chazkel Tzion, David Shiro, whoever, right? It's nice, right? So what might I do? I'll put the tape recorder on from before Shabbat, right? And I'll let Salem, Shiro, whoever, quote, come to my table, right? Can I do that? And he says you can't do that either, right? It's interesting. He doesn't exactly say why. And again, this is all going to build to this last point of there's a lack of clarity, which we've seen already, but we're gonna solidify when we get to the end of, hey, what's wrong with these things? But basically, he's saying you can't have the TV, the radio, the tape recorder, and so on. And we're going to get to modern versions of these things.
Rabbi, yeah. He's not clear as to why you mentioned, but like, if let's say we were allowed to, like, the shul would be affected by it, right? The rabbi's, Shabbat right. Class would be, recorded, or
right. Eli Mansour's Seudah Shlishit thing that got, recorded. Why not?
Music. Let's play. Someone will turn on the time.
Yaakov Salem had a great Kaddish this morning. Let's make sure he has it. Rabbi Beyda made a great speech. Put it. Why not? Right. Can we record these things? He's saying no. By the way, I'll flip it. Right. Let's say how great would it be if we had Rabbi Sachs in shul, right? He's beautiful, wonderful speaker, maybe for, I don't know, special time, Yom HaAtzmaut. Okay, to get him to come to the shul, right? It's not practical. He lives in England. It's not coming. It's $50,000 minimum to get him to come, right? Okay, and he's Rabbi, you can't do it. He says, but listen, I'll make a tape for you, right? I'll and put it on timer, right? I'm going to make it on Tuesday, right? And then just, it could be a tape that lasts 24 hours, and I'm still working with the cassette world, right? But you could have 24 hours of cassette, right? You have it quiet till the time where we know it's going to be, which We know when the Torah ends at 10:45 on Shabbat morning, and we stall the time perfectly. And then boom, we put the tape recorder on, and Rabbi Sachs gets on he's on the tape from Tuesday, comes on Shabbat. He says, "Hey, Bnei Yitzhak, how are you? Great to know that you're out there. Of course, I recorded this on Tuesday, right? So no one thinks that he's recording it on Shabbat." And then he gives a beautiful speech, right? And everybody's happy, right? And feeds me, right?
There goes your job.
What's that?
There goes your job.
Yeah. Now you know why the rabbis don't allow this kind of thing, right? But what's wrong with that? What's the problem, right? It's not so simple, right? It's not so easy to explain to anyone why that is a problem, because we're not doing anything, right? What's the issue, right? So we do need to get to this, but what I'm telling you is, as I said, he doesn't give a clear reason why not, but he says you can't do that, right? So that's where we're at for today. Again, we're gonna come back to it, but that's what he's saying. Now he moves on to another big topic, which of course is important to many of us, and we want to know, and that is the telephone. Right now, remember, most of what he's been talking about on a telephone here is what we call today a landline, right? And cellular telephones, the mobile phones that we have, and it's in the various different versions, and there's lots of different versions that we have today. Those didn't exist, or he wasn't writing about them. So let's see. We're mostly talking about what we call today landlines, which most of us don't use all that often anymore. But anyway, he says like this: Asur lehishtamesh, asur lehishtamesh betelefon b'Shabbat. Hold on one second. Shalom bayit. Sorry, I got to. Okay. Okay. So he says like this: telephone. Asur l'shtamesh b'telefon b'Shabbat. Forbidden to use the phone on Shabbat. V'chen asur lahashiv v'la'anot l'mi shetilpeno elav. He says, and you can't answer the phone either, right? It's like not only I can't pick up and dial. It says someone calls, and someone else picked up. He says you can't answer the phone either, right? Meaning like I didn't actually do anything, right? Like the phone is. However it got off the hook, right? Maybe Boy took the phone off the hook, right? or something like that. I'm not touching the phone, right? I'm just talking into the other, talking, right? Maybe not even next to it, right? It could be, it says you can't use it. It says, it says, but if someone is ill, right? Even if it's not a life-threatening thing, if someone is ill, then you're allowed to use it in order to deal with the illness, right? It doesn't mean that you could use it to order a pizza, right? It means that you could use it to speak to the doctor, call an ambulance, get some kind of medicine, something that's going to make the ill person in a better position than he or she would be without it. He says, but in that instance, he says, you should have a goy lift up the phone and put down the phone. So in other words, if it's not a life-saving situation, right? It's a less than life-saving, but nevertheless medical situation. So I don't want to go too much into this, because the truth is what defines life-saving, not life-saving, is an area I don't think we did. I think we have to get to. So we will. But assume it's not life-saving, right? So what are we talking about?
Rabbi, last year, my son fell on his bike on a Friday night, and it wasn't life-saving, but his leg was injured. So, and I didn't have a goy to call Hatzalah, so I had to call Hatzalah.
So I will say here, without going into all the laws. So first of all, anything that's internal and whatever, and we don't know, is life-saving, because you don't know. You think he's okay, right? Anyone who hits their head, that's already, something, concussion, any kind of internal bleeding, the things that are like a migraine. A migraine, you get them all the time. You know what they are. It's, something like that. And, a migraine is not life-threatening. It hurts, right? It's very significant. It's disruptive to Shabbat. You can't be a normal person when you have a migraine. right? But you know the migraine, you know what it is. It's not a problem. So in that instance, I don't know how a phone would help, but let's say a phone would help, right? Let's say there's a guy, down the block, down the, in the other end of the town that you can't get to him by walking because you have a migraine, right? But if you call him, he could come to you and he could deliver the healing that you need. He could give you a medicine, a head massage, I don't know, whatever. If such a case could be constructed, so we would say you could do that, but you should let the goy do it, not do it yourself, right? You understand? Like, I would argue potentially, stitches, right? Like stitches, it's not life-threatening. You're fine. It's just, but even stitches, you got to be careful about what we're talking about. But I'm talking minor, not talking big deal. I'm talking something that it has to be something that you're sick enough that you at least have to lie down, right? Or something like that. It's not like, oh, I have a little buzz of a headache, right? That I'm not talking about. That's not enough. But it has to be more than that. It has to be something that you would lie down, right? So like diarrhea, I don't know, something like that. You're knocked out. I would say the flu, but we've learned that that's not something to be taken lightly either. But yeah, I think you kind of understand what I mean by it. So it's something, and if not, we'll try and go through some other things at a later time. But we're talking about something that's not life-threatening. So obviously, what's not included in this, right, is someone who's giving birth, right? Giving birth, it's a serious deal, right? Someone who needs a surgery, that's very serious. Someone that has, a kid, almost anything that has to do with a kid is serious because you don't know. The kid's not communicating. He doesn't know. He doesn't understand. The developing kid, not even a question. Almost anything to do with the kid, you could pick up the phone. But we're talking about less than that, right? And so there are things that fit into less than that. Okay. He says, he's so close to the telephone that you should pull the plug from before Shabbat, right? You shouldn't have the telephone plugged in your wall on Shabbat, right? Okay, that's what he has to say. בפרוץ ריב רציני בין אנשים שאינם כל כך תרבותיים, ויש חשש שהעניין עלול להסתיים בנפשות אם המשטרה לא תתערב, מותר להזעיק את המשטרה על ידי הטלפון למנוע ריב זה. A very interesting case that he brings. He says, let's say there's a fight that's breaking out between two people, right? The neighbors are not so happy with one another. There's a domestic violence dispute. I always try to tie into coronavirus. So uptick in domestic violence calls in the last months has been phenomenal. It's been enormous, right? More people have called the police on their spouse than ever before. Anyone surprised? But okay. So let's say you hear that, right? You hear your next door neighbor. There's yelling, there's screaming, they throw, the scene from The Godfather, right? They're throwing the plates at one another, the stuff like that, right? Or on the street, this happened to me last year, 2 years ago. The neighbors, they were going at each other, right? And they were, so the question is, can I pick up the phone and call the police, right? Because who knows what's going to happen? Someone's going to get hurt, right? It's call the police, right? Can you call the police? He says you can. He says you could pick up the phone and call the police. He says because you're not sure what's going to happen over there, and potentially that's dangerous, right? You don't know who has a gun, who's got a temper that they can't control, or things like that. If you gauge that it's dangerous and you think someone could get hurt here, you are allowed to call the police. So interesting case that he's telling you there. And he has a lot of different opinions that he says. He says if you see a bank robbery in what's it called? As it's happening, he says you could pick up the phone and call the police because the bank robbery, you don't know. Someone's going to pull a gun. Something's going to happen. So you might be saving a life to get the police involved. He says, כאשר מטלפנים בשבת לצורך פיקוח נפש, אם אפשרי הדבר, ירים את השפופרת בדרך שונה ממה שרגיל לעשות במות החול, כגון שירים את השפופרת במרפקו, שינוי זה עדיף יותר מאשר שינוי שירימו שני אנשים יחד את השפופרת. He says, if you're in a situation where you have to call, he says, even for saving a life, he says, if you could do it like a little differently, right? Like, with your shoulder, with your left hand instead of your right hand, with your arm. He says, if you could do that, he says that's an advisable thing. He says, so if you are someone that works at a hospital or you're Hatzalah or something like that, you're allowed to put the phone back on the hook, right? Like, you can pick up the phone because it might be dangerous. He says, but maybe once you answer the phone, maybe that's it. The allowance is done. Either you're saving the life, not, but putting the phone doesn't save anyone's life. He says you can. He says, because why? He says you could return the phone to the hook because I don't know who else might call, right? Something else may happen later, right? So therefore you return the phone to the hook. So we're going to stop here today. Tomorrow he's going to get into an answering machine, a fax machine, a doorbell, a microphone. We have a lot of different cases that we have to talk about. And Baruch Hashem, we're on our way. We're seeing a lot of different cases. And as I said, some point in the middle of next week, we'll be able to get to a situation where we'll have a comprehensive conversation on the use of electricity with as many specific guidelines as we can. Right now, we're just going through the book to be able to see what he has to say. And then we'll come with a summary piece next week. So we're going to stop here with the class for today. Again, all learning and all tefillah, Le'iloi Nishmat Rina Bat Rose and Simcha Bat Sophia.